morning and welcome back to the lecture series on refugee migration diaspora. So, today we will be understanding the borderland discourse. What is borderland and the discourse and discussions, the polemics and the contentions surrounding or centering the borderland. So, borders, boundaries, frontiers, and borderlands are human creations which are grounded in various ethical traditions. There is nothing natural, nothing pre given about the borders. We have to understand they have been created at some points in history by different human civilizations, by different social groups under different socio-historical, political, even economic conditions. So, critics like Alan Buchanan and Margaret Moore, in their work States, Nations, and Borders, The Ethics of Making Boundaries, which came out in 2003, compare natural and international law traditions with the Jewish, Christian, Confucian, Islamic, and liberal ethical traditions of boundaries. And they find that the ethical traditions are somewhat ambiguous in nature in terms of how to establish or how to define the borders. And the question of border includes the questions of settlement, purchase, inheritance, as well as cessation. And the fact that all of these traditions, most of them being, coming from Abrahamic tradition, they all agree that conquest is not justifiable, right? They are talking about all these factors like settlement, purchase, inheritance, cessation, and they all agree that a conquest cannot be justified vis-a-vis the question of the ethical, tradition of boundaries, frontiers, and borderlands. Now, the conceptualization of border is predominant since the time of the Roman Empire. So, boundaries would be organized in the Roman Empire according to a hierarchy of spaces. So, territories of varied dimensions and functions, which include settlements, cities, provinces, and regions, would be taken into consideration when talking about boundaries. So, during the Middle Ages, there is ample evidence to say that the feudal system was more interested with the control of cities and territories, and these cities and territories would have vague borderlands rather than clear cut boundaries. So, according to Emmanuel Brunet Jely, I quote, thanks to geographers, however, mapping technology allowed rulers to have a spatial view of their positions. Thus, what were originally borderland or border regions, referring to more fluid and vague spaces, progressively became permanent boundaries or frontiers. Now, early works of geographers and historians contributed to the formation of the modern political border of nation states and how the boundaries of these nation states work in a given geopolitical scenario. This question can be dealt through international recognition by other boundaries of sovereign and territorially demarcated states. So these states are all abutting, and one nation state's demarcated boundaries and limits, or as well as which areas it can rule. These questions are contingent with these questions are incumbent on the boundaries and limits of other sovereign states. So these states are all abutting one another, they are adjacent to one another, and a nation state's boundary is a very strategic way of defining where a given people, a given social group, a given national community belong in a legitimate way, and where they cannot navigate without a visa or passport. So basically, it's a way nation states are demarcated in such a way as to define the terrain, the territory within which a national community can navigate without a visa or passport legally, and beyond uh, a certain border, which is the national border, they would need their credentials as a foreign visitor. So, as summarized by critic Julian Mengi in the first half of the 20th century, I quote Mengi, the earliest systematic studies of boundaries focused on both natural and man made boundaries. Unquote. Ellen Churchill Semple, for example, compares boundaries and frontiers by arguing that natural geographic frontiers where humans cannot settle are ideal boundaries. So, natural geographic frontiers are defined by desolated lands where human habitation is less or none, according to Semple. Thomas H. Haldick and William Leidy widely discussed about the virtues of boundaries. So there are critics that look at borders and boundaries as salient features that actually maintain peace and harmony. They limit tensions, they arrest war-like situations. So these critics like Haldick and Leidy view boundaries as being either good or bad, depending on their intrinsic merit in fostering or limiting tensions and possibly in arresting war-like situations between different nation states. So this is where many scholars who talk about the partition of Indian subcontinent are also coming from. They would actually second this argument or this opinion that partition of India has been a good decision indeed, in fact, and it has arrested, it has stopped war-like situations. Otherwise, what would happen in an undivided India after the British quit are possibilities of endless civil wars. So some people are proponents of boundaries, and they see the virtues, the positive side of defining boundaries. So borderlands are territories that are subordinated to a certain national regime and are therefore subject to the norms of its specific political system. Hence, along a border, two extremely different political systems may meet if subjected to extremely different political norms, and thereby rendering the borderland as volatile. Here, the example that comes to mind definitely is the Indo-Pak border, the India-Pakistan border. We have the Wagah border, and every day we have, since the last several years, the practice of a flag lowering ceremony, and there is a certain set of audience that gathers around this ceremony where the gates of India and Pakistan are opened, and at the sunset the flags are lowered and the gates are closed. And the parade that happens every day over there, where the Indian and the Pakistani soldiers from respective sides come and kind of they display their military skills, makes the place look not like the most peaceful piece of land. Of course, the place looks volatile, the place looks full of brimming with nationalist sentiments. And we see it's a meeting point. Wagah border, the Indo-Pak border, is a meeting point of very extremely different political systems. Indian nation state, which vouches, which celebrates secular values, versus Pakistan as a nation state, which has always avowed its Islamic values that shape its nationhood, right? So, history and the collective memory of a population are sometimes stronger reference points towards construction of identity rather than national discourses. Because national discourses, we have to understand, are more formal, they are top down, they are streamlined, and they are hence selective. National discourses cannot accommodate the complexity, the layeredness, the contradictions that a borderland entails. right? And so identity that is shaped through the borderland culture, through the borderland discourse, is something more or less than the purely streamlined national discourse, right? So, in numerous cases, we see that borderlands are also zones of cultural overlap where two abutting nations' cultures kind of merge, interchange, and almost become identical. It could be that the two nations share very different values, just like in the case of India and Pakistan, whose values as nation states are vastly different. But borderland cultures do share certain elements in terms of the people, the local people that inhabit the border areas. So, here the national identities to some extent become blurred among the population. So, over the course of history, the functions and roles of borderlands have continuously evolved and changed. And this change, this journey, can be understood only in their specific context. So, borderlands are shaped by immediate history, politics, and the power dynamics, as well as by the cultural and social issues. Critic Ansi Pasi in 2003 suggests that borderlands have been actively contested and negotiated throughout the past, and they keep appearing and disappearing. So, while they are man made, we also have to understand that borders are not forever, and borders are also not permanent in terms of the contours they encapsulate or they define. Borders are therefore complex spatial and social phenomena which are neither static nor invariable, but which must be understood as highly dynamic, highly changeable, highly protean, and fraught with different kind of socio-political, cultural tensions. They carry the historical burden or the historical baggage from different junctures in time. They carry the historical burden or the historical baggage from different junctures of time. Borderland communities lying on the margin of more than one state are therefore existing in different development modes and different terms of governance, which may not exactly tally with or adhere with the mainland culture and the mainland governance style. Often, the communities settling in the borderland areas are physically closer to a foreign regime and farther from the central power of their own respective government. So they are closer to a nation state that just begins, at the end of their own national border, and they can less identify with the mainland politics and the mainland culture. People living in the borderlands are therefore acquainted with different regimes of power, and they may be skillful users of more than one language, more than one tradition. They often handle more than one currency for their daily interaction and exchanges. Anthropologists have been actively studying borders and borderlands, not only because many borderlands have been neglected in research, but also because there are significant cases where anthropologists find concentrated marginalized groups such as the refugees and minorities intriguing the cross border state relations and human interactions and forming thereby mixed and blurred identities with displaced population, with populations constantly entering and exiting the border, the borders being not sealed but most of the times porous in nature. This intriguing cross border state relations and human interactions and exchanges result in certain very interesting hybrid, mixed, and blurred identities, right? So, there are two things happening simultaneously: the nation states with the borders and boundaries trying, at least on pen and paper, to maintain some kind of pure, immiscible national community. And then, in practice, at the ground zero level, we see the borderland communities creating their own habitation, creating their own ecosystem, which is sometimes, important for their sustenance and survival. And such cultures actually destabilize the question of national purity or an ideal national community, because people are constantly going out and there is an influx, sometimes, many a times, at an illegal level, something that is not sanctioned by either of the nation states. So, borderland ethnographies often provide interesting stories of alternative voices, alternative, power positions, alternative worldviews, and alternative state relations, history, culture, and identity, which deviate, which do not really cohere with what has been defined by the respective nation state. Critic Alexander Horstman and Reed L. Wadley suggest that while borders are themselves defining and delimiting state power and sovereignty, at the same time, they are sites, they form sites that constantly challenge and negotiate such state power. So, there is this thesis and antithesis, there is this stabilizing and destabilizing simultaneously happening vis a vis the borders, where to begin with, the borders are supposed to maintain the state power and sovereignty, and at the same time, such power, such sanctity of a national habitat is challenged and negotiated through the actual happenings in the borderland culture. So, borders and boundaries are often imagined as hard and enclosing frontiers. However, in actuality, they are porous in nature. They are not completely sealed. So, borderlanders can be active border crossers who make use of skills to challenge state control, permeate into the other state's terrain, and they thereby destabilize the discourses on boundaries in order to work on the improvement of life chances and livelihoods. So, what happens is that when the nationally demarcated lines are being crossed by individuals, this activity is propelled by personal needs, by some very localized incentives, including chances of a better livelihood on the other side of the border. People navigate, people traverse onto the other side of the border, most of the times illegally, in order to find better job, better business, better livelihood. And this is happening at a subterranean level. This is not really sanctioned by either of the nation states. Regarding borderland governance, Emmanuel Brunet Jayli in 2013 suggests that while governance is never transparent, borderland governance is more than national government at its periphery, right? So, further, Yuk Wachan and Brantley Womack in 2016 suggests that borderland is a place of contact. Its realities on the ground are not simply outcomes of national policies on each side, right? Instead, it is shaped through creatively interacting with opportunities and constraints. So, people actually work out their life. The borderland people, the borderland communities work out their life through understanding, through gauging both the opportunities as well as the constraints of what it means to live on either side of the border, or to kind of traverse or expand their business or livelihood on the other side of the border. They try to gauge or envision the opportunities and constraints involved in cross border communication and interactions. So, borderland communities are often skillful at appropriating and posing challenges to the sanctity of state authorities and state policies. Now, whether viewed from the perspective of a single border trader or an entirely binational region, the borderlands are, we have to understand, they are lively, fluid places. They are contingent on their national definitions, but identities of and within borderlands shape themselves as they navigate between the opportunities opened by contact and constraints of their situation. There are both the things simultaneously going on. There is vulnerability, there is volatility, there are opportunities of cross border trading and interactions of selling and buying, but there are also constraints in terms of the border security force. For example, if any kind of smuggling activity or illegal activity is caught, the penalty, the consequences can be severe depending on how draconian, how strict the national rules are in these cases. So they're driven by both these determinants. On the one hand, the opportunities of cross border interactions or communication. On the other hand, there are plenty of constraints, demarcations, and dangers, as well as risks involved. So asymmetry of resource accessibility is a root feature of borderland governance. This is because of the relationship of the periphery to the center, as well as the relationship among the different states. Moreover, what we see is that the international asymmetries of power, capabilities, and resources, all of these factors go on to shape the structure of border contact and governance, right? So, international relations, a nation's position vis-a-vis international politics, as well as the relationship, that usually asymmetrical relationship between center and periphery. All these things shape the nature of border contact and governance. Borderland governance serves as a framework which is broad enough to cover both the state and the non-state actors. This special issue deals along with a wide spectrum of issues. These issues range from economic development through different forms of cross-border exchanges such as trade, investment, cross-border marriage, and so forth. And they extend to trans-border human flows, which include borderland tourism, migration, as well as illegal human trafficking, right? So, borderland governance has within its ambit covering both the state and the non-state actors. Borderland governance immediately involves interstate relationship, trans-border interactions, compatibility and incompatibility in terms of social, political, and economic systems, value and ideological differences between two sovereign states, the power asymmetry vis-a-vis the central governance and the peripheral governance or alternate existences at the border, then identity shifts and the question of constant mobility. Yu-Kwa Chan and Caroline Grillo suggest that while one may assume that at border areas, frequent interaction across borders will bring familiarity of interchangeable identities and mixed ways of living, on the other hand, we see that border areas also can witness the worst types of stereotypes and conflicts due to intensified border interactions, right? So, just like borderlands can bring plenty of familiarity and scopes of exchange, interchangeable identities, and a hybrid or mixed way of living, it can also be a site, it can become a site of intensified tension and conflict. The contingency of border realities can lead to rigidities of identity as well as to hybridization, which define people and which are used by the people as well, right? So, what happens is that there are two types of tendencies in the borderland culture, because we see that the people from two different nations, abutting nations, living in the border area are very similar in terms of their ethnicity, their habits, their language, their culture. So, from this phenomenon, two attitudes generally arise. One is to identify across the border. There is a trans-border identification with one another because of this similarity. Conversely, there can also be a tendency to maintain difference. So this it all depends on whether a humanity is focusing on the similarities or the continuities between the people living in the borderland culture, or the differences. Sometimes I can give an example. In Amar Mitra's Wild Goose Country, we see that the Bengalis and the Bangladeshis are very similar in terms of how they look, how they speak, what they eat, how they dress up. It is indeed, strange that there should be a border dividing them. But then the traders who come to buy and sell, they are sometimes very conscious of the side they come from. So they want to call their currency as taka and not as rupees, like we call in India. So when someone asserts that my currency is called taka and not rupee, or my food is prepared in a certain style which is not exactly like the way Indians eat, they are thereby asserting a difference. So there can be two types of attitudes basically arising out of it. One is to identify in a trans-border situation, or create a trans-border identification basically. The other is to demarcate and kind of reify the border and remember certain differences and assert these differences. As a way of saying that we are similar but not quite the same. So, border relations are concerned with the shifting discourses of border identities at different levels. These levels could be individuals, families, specific social groups, as well as the state, and how these border identities affect daily border crossing, interaction, and livelihood. Border crossing mobility necessarily evokes negotiation and contestation of interests, ideologies, status, and identity. So, borders generate new social spaces which can be real or imagined, and at the same time, borders split social spaces. This is to say that crossing a border and entering a new land, a host land, as a refugee, as a muhajir, is certainly a fall in status. It means that I have come to a new land in terms of have not. I have to refurbish my citizenry, my status of citizenship, right? It means that some of my interests will now be jeopardized or will be controlled by the new nation state. My refurbishing, my rebuilding of identity will be at the behest of the national policies of the new nation state where I have entered. So, borders generate new social spaces, right? When a refugee comes to a host land, many times the refugee colonies create their own heterotopia, where the culture is very different from the host culture. And this heterotopian or heterotopic identity or habitat is very consciously constructed as a way of not forgetting the tradition from where, or the culture, the background from where one has come, as a way of retaining some elements of one's own homeland. This is something very much observable among the refugee communities, right? So, a border can be defined as a state's intervention into overlapping social domains, such that family, business, religion, and livelihood can all be separated through a border for the sake of establishing and validating sovereignty. For the sake of sovereignty, validating sovereignty, a line can cut across business, religion, even homes, even families, even rivers. So, the implementation of border control renders ambiguity to the legalized and institutionalized framework for border crossing. Borderland families actively conduct border crossings and make trans-border familial connections and personalized trading relationships, thereby continuously creating translocal social spaces for which legalization may or may not cater. So, there is on the one hand a legalized and institutionalized framework for border crossing, and on the other hand subterranean, a localized kind of agreement or culture of translocal social spaces where legalization may not cater, may not even apply. Critics E.C. Chapman and Grant Evans suggest that Asian borderlands offer a peculiar landscape for the understanding of governance and development. This is not only because many of these borderlands have been sites for political struggles and military conflicts, rather, they are also spaces that have witnessed many shifts and shuffles of powers and regimes of regulation across decades and centuries. While some of these borderlands still carry the legacies of colonialism, others were once closed or semi closed and later they reopened in the recent years. So, it's also about the nature of a geopolitical region's politics. It depends on the South Asia's politics how the, for example, the China Tibet border is functioning, how the Indo-Pak border and commerce is functioning, how the Indo-Bangladesh commerce and trade are functioning. It all depends on the politics of that region, right? Borderlands are deeply affected by the contingent, by the contemporary politics. They are also now and then under stress due to contingent political struggles and diplomatic standstill. Like I said, if there is an outbreak of war, if there is an attempt at invading territory, a conquest, or the diplomatic relationship is at a dead end somehow, then the border areas certainly suffer a lot. At times when political divides have been mended, the borderlands can act as growth regions. So, this good international relations can kind of reflect on the thriving borderland cultures. When the international relations are smooth and amicable, it reflects on a thriving and flourishing borderland culture. The borderlands are booming with future possibilities in terms of social development, in terms of commerce as well as education. So, Asia accommodates extremely diverse political and economic systems. Borderlands in Asia are mostly quick to exploit or capitalize on the newly developed borderland political economies, and thereby they work on improving their life chances and livelihoods. So, they capitalize on the borderland political economies in order to develop their life chances, to improve their life chances. The borderlanders are very much dependent on this political economies of the borderland. Understanding the concept of asymmetries of power and identities in the borderlands therefore entails or involves opening the prism of asymmetric relationships at borderlands, which results in multiple overlapping time-space domains and metaphors, right? So, borderlands are not very easy places. We have to understand there are multiple time-space domains and metaphors that overlap in these regions. They cannot be handled in the same manner as the mainland culture and the issues and the problems associated with the mainland. Their own political economies, their own local issues need to be looked at, separately and in a unique capacity. So, borders are not just hard territorial lines, they are institutions which result from bordering policies. They are therefore about people. So, borders are not impersonal, hard territorial lines, they are about people, and for most settled territories, they are predominantly about inclusion and exclusion. When we draw or demarcate a border, we are meaning to include a community within the part of a given nation, and in the same tone, we are excluding certain people from the territory of that nation. A nation happens through the question of inclusion and exclusion, as they are woven into varied cultural, economic, and political fabrics. So, borderlands are not just territorial lines, they are institutions which result from bordering policies, and at the ground level, they are about people, they are not impersonal spaces or places. For most settled territories, they are predominantly about inclusion and exclusion. We understand that when borders are demarcated to form a nation state, a national community is identified or consolidated through including certain people, and in the same tone, through excluding others who are part of other nation states. So, this game of or this ploy of inclusion and exclusion is instrumental in shaping a national community. And so, borders are therefore woven into varied cultural, economic, and political fabrics. Bounded territories and borderlands are the outcomes of continual interactions and intersections between the actions of people on the one hand and the constraints and limits placed by contextual and structural factors on the other. So, borderlands are shaped by two things. There is a pre-given ossified, ostensibly ossified structure of border as a hard territorial line, and then in practice there is the people's agency which constantly disquiets such line through everyday activities as a way of boosting their own sustenance, boosting their own survival. So, our understanding of borders is defined by what Joseph Lapid calls as the territorialist epistemology. Borders started as Roman limits built of stone or turf in North Africa, Germany, Britain, because Romans viewed boundaries as markers between sovereign states and also enjoyed world hegemony. The Roman lines represent the borderline of the Roman Empire at its greatest extent in the 2nd century AD. These lines stretched over 5,000 kilometers from the Atlantic coast of northern Britain through Europe to the Black Sea, and from there to the Red Sea and across North Africa to the Atlantic coast. The vestiges of the lines today comprise relics of built walls, ditches, forts, fortresses, watchtowers, and civilian settlements. So, borders are no longer only about territorially bounded authorities. We have to understand that they are not just sea and airports of entry or border crossings. Borders are increasingly also about virtual or simply impalpable borders. Here we are talking about electronic borders, non-visible borders, biometric identification and control, as well as electronic devices that are set to track flows of goods and people, such as tracking financial transactions, spywares of all kinds, and so forth. Etienne Balibar suggests that borders are, to quote Balibar, vacillating, multiplied, and reduced in their localization, thinned out and doubled, no longer the shores of politics but the space of the political itself, unquote. So, to put in a nutshell, there is a growing literature that is now suggesting that we need to develop our understanding of borders, which goes beyond our territorialist and geopolitical, intellectual, and political traditions and dimensions. So, increasingly, our understanding of bordering processes and policies tend to revisit or question our traditional conceptualization of borders. To understand borders and borderlands, we need to focus on the agency of borders, which is marked by activities of social, economic, and political individuals, as well as the processes of production and reproduction of borders. Here we are talking about the bordering and debordering praxis, which at a given time in history and within a given space are economically, politically, and culturally defined and embedded. These praxis are defined or churned out of economic, political, and cultural immediacy, right? The instantaneous meaning of economic, political, and cultural dynamics are reflected through the processes, the praxis of bordering and debordering. In today's time, the non-territorial borders are not always located in borderlands. For instance, processes of pre-clearance of goods or people may be done anywhere but at the boundary line, where they often make the least sense. This is very paradoxical, actually. The pre-clearance of goods and people are not actually and always happening at the boundary line where we think they happen. Moreover, borders are shaped through competing production and reproduction practices that are fundamentally rooted in individual actions, and therefore they are deeply associated with economic, political, and cultural interests and motivations. So, as a way of concluding our lecture today, we have this flow chart where we are looking at different analytical lens which may enhance another to integrate or disintegrate the borderland. So, different lens include the local cross-border culture, the policy activities of multiple levels of government, the local cross-border political clout, and then the market forces and trade flows. These are all interspersed and interrelated. So, the local cross-border culture speaks to political activities and local cross-border political clout. Similarly, local cross-border political clout is closely conjoined with the question of market forces and trade flows. So, when we talk of local cross-border culture, we are looking at the sense of belonging, common language of ethnic, religious, socioeconomic background which span the border and borderland. When we are talking about policy activities of multiple levels of government, we are meaning multiple governance that span the border to link local, regional, provincial, state, and central governments, and then the task specific public and private sector organizations. When we are talking about local cross-border political clout, we are here referring to active local civic and political organizations and individuals which initiate and expand local level relations, local policy networks, local policy communities, and symbolic regimes. And finally, when we are talking about market forces and trade flows, we are referring to flows of goods, people, and investments. So, all these are very closely connected as a network, as a nexus. We cannot separate the question of cross-border culture from cross-border politics, and cross-border politics from policy making of multiple levels at multiple levels of government, and all these in turn are connected to the market forces and trade flows. So, with this, we come to the end of our lecture today. Let's meet with another topic and a new set of discussions in our next lecture. Thank you.